on the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use. Welcome to the GBC podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. We are the official podcast of the Lot 1 Tailgate Party, which is at Lambeau Field every home game. This is episode 82, created September 9th, 2024. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me, Jeff in Minnesota and Neil on the East Coast. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
I am having a beer from the RAR Brewing Company that I think gives a good summary of the Packers' offense and defense on Friday, out of order.
So, Neil, in honor of your multiple beverages from last week, I decided, well, I like that idea, and I actually have two that go together, Harp and Guinness for a black and tan.
We've got a mixed drink of Benedictine and brandy for the B&B. You can find us on YouTube and Twitter at Green Bay Chat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast Green Bay Chat, and just the audio is available on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify by searching for Green Bay Chat. What are we looking at this week? First and foremost, it is the Jordan Love injury and the Packers quarterback plan for week 2. We'll take a game review and kind of break down both the offense and the defense. Of course, looking ahead to the home opener against the Indianapolis Colts, and that means tailgating. And there will also be some history that we have between the Packers and the Colts. And while none of us is a medical doctor, nor do we play one on the internet, we are going to talk about what we do know about the Jordan Love injury. And I just want to get that out there, Neil. Boy, was it annoying on Friday night after the game, trying to sift through online information and every person who wanted to break down every frame of this injury to tell us what they think happened ahead of time. There's a reason that you're sitting at home, friends. And
yeah, but I mean,
but that we're sitting here.
But I mean, it was worse than that, because there were people who, in theory, actually knew what they were doing. That said, that actually had qualifications as orthopedics, and they came up with multiple wrong answers as well. I mean, it wasn't just the person at home who was coming up with. In fact, I would argue that it wasn't the people at home that were the biggest problem. It was the people who, in theory, knew what they were doing that thought this was their opportunity to make their name. That I'm going to be known as the person who is able to diagnose medical injuries based on what happens on a screen without any medical testing. And I hold a lot more disdain for the medical people who were giving their opinions than anyone else.
Right? Because any moron can weigh in, right? Oh, yeah, that looks so bad, right? Oh, yeah. But if you're a friggin' doctor and you go, oh, that looked bad, you should know better, right? Don't do that.
In fairness,
there were completely confident opinions that, yes, this is absolutely an ACL injury. Yes, this is absolutely an ankle injury. I didn't see anyone that said MCL injury, and maybe partly because I was trying to avoid all that bullshit because I knew we weren't going to have an answer until we actually had testing.
And now that we do know what it is, that it is an MCL sprain with seemingly a mild severity to it. But Neil, let's kind of go back to that. And all three of us having played in sports or just been active, there's been times where, something happens to you that is just so benign and you can't imagine like the throbbing pain and the lingering pain that comes from something. And then there's other times where you're like, I know that body part bent in a direction that it's not supposed to bend in, and you walk away like nothing happened. And that's why just trying to get a visual. Yes. Do you see a knee move in a direction that it shouldn't move in? But there's so many other factors in the body flexibility and things like that you can't get into that. But the great news is it is a mild MCL sprain. Jeff, not a wrist sprain, but a knee sprain. Neil, you told us you have had an MCL sprain.
I did indeed. I had a high grade 2 MCL sprain. This is back about 12 years ago when I was running. I happened to be in New York, and you talk about how stupid things happen. I was changing trains at Queensboro Plaza. I stepped out of my subway, turned, planted, and all of a sudden my entire leg felt like it was going to collapse. And that was the beginning of about 3 months of real misery as far as the injury is concerned, that eventually was diagnosed as an MCL sprain. And I think the biggest thing about an MCL sprain, so the MCL, first of all, is on the interior of your knee that's controlling stability. And I would say from my experience with an MCL sprain that basically kept me out of marathon training for an entire season, the basic problem is that you have this I mean, the pain is one thing, but the pain will go away. It's the random appearance of complete lack of stability. And what you really lose with an MCL sprain is the ability to plant and turn. And that's obviously what I did on the platform. And it's that you all of a sudden just put your foot down wrong. You try to push off a little way without thinking, and then you have this excruciating pain, but also you have this feeling that your entire leg is going to collapse. Like you've just got absolutely no stability and no support whatsoever. And the general rule for recovery, and obviously Jordan Love has the best sports medicine on the planet helping him, but the general rule is it just takes rest because you've got to have that muscle heal. And the problem is, as you're going through, you're wearing a brace, whatever, you're still going to have these moments where it's going to be very bad for a while. And then you're going to have these moments where you're just going to have this feeling that your leg is going to collapse, or these just sudden bits of pain, and you never know where it's going to come from. And the biggest problem is actually a lack of confidence as it goes along. As you're getting close to being healed, you have no idea when your leg is going to be able to give out or not. And that means that you're not going to walk. And as an athlete, you're not going to run, you're not going to plant your feet in the same way. And I think the biggest example of an MCL injury impacting somebody's season was a few years ago when Steph Curry had an MCL injury early in the NBA playoffs, went on to the NBA Finals against LeBron James. James's team won in 7 games, but Steph Curry never was Steph Curry in that series. He clearly did not have the confidence to plant, to put his foot down, to do all of the things that Steph Curry does that are magical. If you look, the way that I look at it is that LeBron James with his 4 rings, well, one of them was essentially completely tainted because Steph Curry was not able to be Steph Curry. He was clearly affected the entire time of the NBA Finals, even though he was healed and back. He wasn't healed and back. And I think that is what I worry about most as far as Jordan Love, is that, there's going to be a period where he's going to look a lot of the time like he is fine, but he's not going to be fine all the time. But he's also not going to have that confidence that he's going to be able to do all the things that he wants to do. And the question is, how long is it until he gets to the point where, let's say you have a 2-3 week period where you haven't felt that pain, you haven't felt that loss of stability at all. It's only after that point where you get that confidence, but you don't know what it is because, you'll feel fine for like a few days and then all of a sudden it'll just happen like that. And I think that's the concern, is how long is it going to take for Jordan Love to not only physically heal, but also to have that level of confidence, knowing that he's not going to have his knee buckle out from underneath him.
Neil, you had made a comment about the brace. I mean, is that something that you relied on, or that he can rely on for stability and for kind of confidence?
It's really more to help aid the healing process. I mean, one of the things that I think is important to understand is, you say sprain means that there's a tear, right? A sprain is not just sort of like a bruise. It's an actual tear, and the tear needs to heal. And the hope is that this is mostly a grade 1 sprain rather than something that's grade 2 or a high grade 2 moving into grade 3. But there's a tear. That tear has to heal, and it's just time. Time is the only thing that ends up healing.
Well, that's true with just about any muscle too. And when we talk about how, maybe we move day to day, we don't do a lot of lateral movement like an athlete does. And whether it's that knee injury, or if you've ever had a groin injury, a foot or ankle injury, you can get to the point where walking straight ahead seems okay, or even running, bicycling, anything that is kind of straight ahead is okay. But then there's a day where you're in the office and you're just kind of strolling out, and all of a sudden someone slides their chair out into the hallway, or something falls in front of you, and you've got to make that stutter step and move out of the way, and you feel it. And you're like, oh my gosh, this injury is still here. Now, take that to the athlete level, like you said, for the most part, it is just rest. There is no magic cure on any of these. It is rest and rest alone. Now, when it comes to playing days, yeah, Jeff, when we talk about different athlete positions, right, we see a lot of our linemen with the big RoboCop braces on their leg that were popular for a while. Basketball players tend to wear those flexi knee braces. And I think that more is just kind of I think that's something that helps with the confidence, right? You get to a point where, like, yeah, everything feels good, but I'm going to put this on just so that it doesn't happen. And it's more of a mind over matter kind of thing.
Sort of a Band-Aid.
Yeah, you want that confidence. You want to say, hey, I'm leaning on something that's there, that's helping me out.
I mean, the good brace does provide some stability, so you're less likely to have those movements that are going to exacerbate this injury. But the fact of the matter is that it's not like wearing a cast that's just going to keep everything completely stiff and in place and is going to magically increase the healing. It's going to take time, and any movement that you're doing is going to provide the risk for further injury to that MCL.
I will say the one visual diagnosis that I did make came on Saturday when video of the team landing at Austin Straubel came out and we saw the players walking down the stairs. And Jordan Love, while he did use the railing, he went down normally, step over step, like you would normally walk, as opposed to step, second foot on the step, then 1 foot down, second foot. You know what I mean? There's a difference between normally walking down the steps and going like that. And as someone who's had four lower leg injuries from the knee down, that was a key to me. He needed help, but he was going step over step. And that right away told me that I didn't think it was going to be as severe as a lot of other people thought it would be. So I'm real happy that the diagnosis came out. The other thing that you got to also consider, Neil and Jeff, is everybody is different. Jeff, you should know, your recovery time was probably a lot different than what someone else's recovery time was. I know mine on a couple of different injuries. One lingered, one didn't. Everybody is different in how they recover.
That's right. And with the trainers and things like that, obviously, like Neil said before, he's got world-class doctors. Time, we can't speed up or slow down time, but you're right. Everybody's a little different. And some people are more like Wolverine. Some people are not. So we hope that he's more like Wolverine, regenerates and heals much quicker than not.
The most important thing, though, is that they're going to have the imaging that they're going to be able to do essentially constantly to know as this is healing, to know what the actual progress is. It's not like when normal people have an MCL, they basically say, okay, this is what you have, and you just are, it's going to take time. And then you just sort of hope that it's getting better, and you notice that it's getting better, but they're going to know exactly how much better it is on a frequent basis. And obviously that's going to put them in a better position to know what he can and what he cannot do.
That's right. He's not going to be limited to like once every 3 months on his health plan to get an MRI, right? It'll be a little more frequent than that, I'm guessing.
That and gone are the days where we have a quarterback who relies on whiskey and Vicodin to get back on the field next week as well, because everybody heals differently. With that, the Packers do have a plan for week 2. The plan right now is to stay as is. Malik Willis was brought in at the end of training camp. Sean Clifford is on the practice squad. Most likely Clifford will get elevated. Your thoughts there, gentlemen? We talked about this as well, kind of in training camp on the kicker's perspective. Do you go out and try to find someone who's just hanging out? And to that, I'm going to just say, I like the Packers plan. If they thought that there was someone like a Ryan Tannehill or anybody else who could have come into camp to get some reps, to kick the tires and see how they look, they would have brought them in to do that. They did that last year with Blake Bortles. The fact that they didn't do it this year with Ryan Tannehill says they did have a plan, perhaps through scouts watching other teams. And the plan is Malik Willis will be the guy going in, and they're going to, he's going to get a crash course in the Packers offense this week.
I think the most important thing not going after somebody like Tannehill says is that they don't think this is going to be a 6 to 8 week injury, because I think if it were a 6 to 8 week injury, they would be looking at veterans and bringing them in. And even if they couldn't play in the first week or two, they'd have somebody who could do a credible stopgap approach for some key weeks in the middle of the season. And the fact that they didn't do that has me more confident than anything else.
Yeah, a much shorter term injury, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, just sort of endure a little bit and see, if we can pull out a win or two, because, looking at the schedule, these games are winnable coming up.
And the decision was made to not put Jordan Love on injured reserve. Putting on injured reserve with the intent to return is 4 weeks. That's 4 games. And if the prognosis is 3 to 6 weeks with sooner rather than later, they don't want him on the shelf for the 4 weeks, even though putting him on the shelf for 4 weeks opens up a roster spot to bring in that veteran. That's not to say that they can't do that later in the season if the injury gets worse, re-injured, things like that. But I like the short-term plan. And yeah, you talk about winnable games, teams that they're looking at in the next 3 weeks, being the Indianapolis Colts coming to town, heading to Tennessee for the Titans, and then the Minnesota Vikings coming to Green Bay. Those are the next 3 games that they're taking a look at. So the Packers making that decision that, again, like I said, Malik Willis is getting that crash course. And as we talk about what we saw in the team this week, what looked good and what didn't look good, that's going to determine probably how the game plan is for the next couple of weeks. A final score of 34-29. The Packers lose to the Eagles in week 1, but Green Bay has a 6-point lead in the first quarter, a 2-point lead at halftime, a game that was never out of control. But as we say, there's only one statistic that counts. It's the score. But there are some good things in the statistics, Neil. I know you like to point out. So tell us.
Can we just start? Can we just start out? 29 points is good. You score 29 points, you should be in good shape as far as winning the game. We had 414 yards of offense, which is also more yards of offense than the Eagles had by a few yards. And we also won the turnover battle, 1 versus 2. Love threw for 260 yards. Jacobs ran for 84 yards and only 16 carries. Wilson added 46 yards on 4 carries. And Reed, 4 receptions for 138 yards. Dobbs adding in 50 yards. There are a lot of good numbers there to look at.
So do we have our number 1 receiver in Reed? Has he, I know it's only been a game, but do we have someone, is he emerging now as our number 1 receiver?
Well, let's point out the first fact that we get a 100-yard receiver in week 1 this season. It doesn't take till nearly the end of the season. 4 catches for 138 yards, a touchdown in there, 70-yard reception. Those are some pretty solid numbers for being targeted 6 times. You know, the possibility of those numbers even being greater. And that's not to mention, oh, by the way, Jaden Reed ran the ball 1 time as well for 33 yards. Kid picked up a pair of touchdowns. He's not just a number 1 receiver. He's a number 1.
Yeah, as long as we don't have him doing punt returns, that would make me happier. But specifically, Reed had more receiving yards than the renowned A.J. Brown did in the game. I think that says as much as anything else as far as where he is among the echelons of NFL receivers.
He's fast. He runs great routes. And from the picture we have here, everybody's excited for him. He accelerates. And it's not that top end speed that, I mean, which he has, but sort of through traffic and picking his way. And, you know, again, sort of that jet sweep, you see that and we're like, oh God, here we go again. Well, this was not a Watson handoff jet sweep. I mean, the blocking was a lot better. I don't think we should probably run a lot of these again, but if a couple of them, you know, to keep the defense honest, it worked to perfection.
And continuing on with what you were talking about as far as our number 1 receiver, I think Dobbs has clearly established himself as a great possession receiver. When we need to get some tough yards, Dobbs is going to do those things, and he seems to be happy in that role rather than those explosive plays. And I'd say the biggest thing is, while we didn't get the explosive plays from Christian Watson, who had, yes, he did have the touchdown, the short touchdown, but he only had 13 yards on 3 receptions. And we're going to need more from Watson this year for that top 4 receiver group to do what we thought it was going to do. And that even ignores that Wicks had no receptions and a couple of drops.
Now for tight end, I think we had a learning. I think there's been some learning done in the tight end room.
Are you talking about Tucker Kraft and his hurdling?
Yeah, that hurdling shit, I think, is done.
It looked like he did. It was twice, though. It looked like he thought about it and then thought otherwise. I mean, it wasn't like just a smooth motion. It was,
no,
I'm not going to do that.
But the fact that it seemed like he actually I'm not. So that's a positive step as well.
The other thing, of course, is that he is clearly the number 1 tight end right now. The Packers had 67 offensive snaps, and Tucker Kraft was on the field for 64 of those 67 snaps. Luke Musgrave was only on the field for 17 snaps in the game, a fairly critical one.
And I think the tight end blocking was also excellent. I think that's why he's also out there that much. I mean, so he's not only a threat to catch the pass, but he had some excellent blocks as well.
Yeah, if we could just get rid of that 1 holding penalty we had.
Blocking overall a key component of this week 1 game. And I think a lot of people, again, the eye test was it was a slippery field or they had the wrong cleats or something along those lines. It did take a while for the offensive line to really make a push. Not a lot of control in the offensive line, especially throughout the first half. And that's really evidenced, I think, by Josh Jacobs' numbers. He really, in that first half, I think we were wondering, what's Aaron Jones going to do this weekend? Because Jacobs was not really showing any flashes of anything. He had 22 yards rushing on the game when then, bam, he breaks off a 22-yard play, another no gainer, and then the big 32-yard run. So at that point, you're now thinking, okay, well, this is why you get a bunch of little plays, you bang, 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 and then you're going to break one free. And I think we forget that is kind of the modus of the running game. You cannot expect 6, 7, 8 yards on every single play. And even though he averages 5.2 in the game, you can't expect to get 5 yards on every running play. There's going to be a lot of zeros, a lot of ones, but it's designed to, like a game of chess, to get the blocking, to get the defense thinking of something, and then you break off the big run.
Yeah. On the other hand, we needed some bigger plays in that first quarter where we realistically could have had 2 touchdowns and a field goal, and we ended up with just 2 field goals. And a lot of that does come down to what I think Matt LaFleur was doing was really trying to establish the run, but did it in a way that was a little bit too much forcing it. It seemed a bit too obvious at times that, okay, that we're going to run on first down. And Jacobs' numbers in the first quarter were 6 rushes for only 4 yards. And the team overall had 4 yards rushing in that first quarter. You look at why we only got 6 points from 3 times into Philadelphia territory. Those 4 yards is one major part of that story.
Right, because it got really vanilla. I mean, when they were deep in, in the red zone, I mean, they were just handed these 2 turnovers. They didn't seem prepared or rusty or whatever you want to call it. They didn't obviously play in the preseason, and that really, really showed. There was no fancy motion. There was not even any play action. It was just very vanilla. And you know what? The Eagles defense is pretty good, to run against and things like that. So I think that was really disconcerting initially to say, okay, what is the rest of the game going to be? Because they just had no luck with those first couple drives.
Of course, we didn't help ourselves in that entire situation. And penalties was, I would argue, the biggest story in the game other than Jordan Love. And let me just note, these are my notes on the penalties that we had during this game. There were a lot of penalties. So officially we had 10 penalties.
How many times you got the word fuck written on there, Neil?
Officially, we had 10 penalties for 71 yards, but we actually had 14 penalties because we had 2 that were overturned because of offsetting penalties, and then 2 that were straight out declined because we didn't play well enough. But let's just go right away into that first drive where we have a Love Jaden Reed 35-yard touchdown pass that is taken away because we had 12 men on the field. Obviously, the Eagles did as well. It ended up being offsetting. It doesn't look like a negative as far as the stat lines are concerned, but that was a touchdown that was taken off the board because of sloppiness. And then at the end of that drive, so that was a 3rd and 6, repeat, get an incompletion. The next play, we have the possibility of either going for it on 4th from the Philadelphia 38, or we have a long field goal that we, in theory, could do as well. A false start takes both of those out, and therefore they end up with the ball as a punt rather than anything that we might have done damage on. And that was really the start of what we did in the first quarter. But we did essentially some variation on that 3 times. The second 2 coming off of huge opportunities with turnovers.
Well, if this is later in the season, or if they're much more crisp, you've got a situation like they had in Dallas last year, right? Suddenly they're up 17-0, it easily could have happened, right? Or
it
21.
should. It's not that it could have happened. It's that it should have happened.
Yes.
We got down to a 1st and 10 at their 13, and we killed the red zone because of the Kraft holding penalty there, becomes a 1st and 23. And similarly, we get to a 1st and goal, and we have a Dobbs offensive pass interference that takes away that. It's these penalties that absolutely destroyed us as far as our ability to score in that first quarter and score out of really spectacular opportunities that the defense created for us. The defense did a great job in that first quarter creating the opportunities, and the offense didn't take advantage of that. And that's a real problem as far as what happened in
the good news. So, the silver lining here is this was the first game. Okay. So in theory, and our hope is that this gets cleaned up. I mean, these are all fixable things. These were dumb mental mistakes and things like that. So this isn't like, oh my God, the turnovers. The defense gave us these excellent opportunities. And I think towards the end, maybe got a little tired.
I think to be expected, and we talked about this too, the lack of preseason play from these starters. And so this effectively becomes your 4th preseason game. which again seems to be the philosophy that the Packers take in a 17-game season, that week one game can still be getting a feel for things. So now take a look at it. They scored 29 points in the game. There's a dozen points that are missed. The first two drives could have been touchdowns over field goals. You've got the missed field goal and then the extra point taken off the board.
No, that should have been 2 points, John, not an extra point. But
it's an extra point that was taken off the board because
John, you need to study some statistics.
And a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, because they had the point on the board, but they took it away.
And John, may I ask a question? If the Packers had one more point and it were 34-30, does that make any difference as far as the outcome of the game?
And neither does 2 points.
2 points
so
makes
the
it a
one
field
point
goal.
you didn't take 2 points off the board. You took 1 point off the board. The point being, don't take the points off the board.
John, you're wrong about that. You're wrong about that. Math says they had the penalty, math says the right decision is take the 50% chance, the greater than 50% chance at 2 points. I'm sorry, don't go.
Did they score the 2 point conversion?
It doesn't matter. The statistics is what matters.
Failed.
The math has not failed. The results don't matter.
Neil, you have to look at that. When your offensive line is not controlling the line of scrimmage, it makes no sense to go for two. And it was proven clearly. This was not proven. It was not
proven. They did the wrong play. They did a U-71 and then ran right at the gut of the Philadelphia defense.
Week 15.
John, math always wins. Math always wins, John.
This is a team that was sloppy in week one, messy, Jeff, like you said, there's mistakes. A team that could have had 41, 42 points on the game. This is a team that the offense is showing that it's ready to go to the next level. Now we have a quarterback injury, and we have to worry about what are the other aspects of this offense. Can this running game get us to the next level for the next couple of weeks? Can our receivers deal with a backup quarterback?
I mean, if you look at how the offense did for the rest of the game, the good news is that we didn't have this one quarter that was just a terrible quarter. Actually, our worst quarter by yardage was the first quarter by a fair margin. We had 140 yards of offense in the second quarter, over 100 in both the third quarter and in the fourth quarter. We kept the ball moving in a lot of different ways, and it seemed to be about balance between the running and the passing. And especially in the second half, that running game took off with Jacobs. And so there were a lot of things that were working well, but in the end, there were just too many penalties. There were too many long third downs. And it was the number of times that we ended up having to do the long third downs that ended up being difficult to convert that ended up killing us. And take, for example, starting out in the second half, and we get down and we've got a 1st and 10, and immediately we have an illegal shift. 2 more plays later, another illegal shift. And then on a punt, we took a 56-yard punt off the board because of an illegal formation. We had 3 penalties in 4 plays, but in the end, it went to a 3rd and 15, and you're not converting those 3rd and 15s very often because that's how math works, John, is that in the end, it's all about statistics. You always have to play the statistics in the modern NFL. If you're giving yourself 3rds and 15s, 3rds and 10s, you're not in a position where you're going to have the greatest likelihood of success.
Math still doesn't control the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, but better play calling can win the line of scrimmage too, John.
Well, there's no math that equates to better play calling, and the right play call was kick the extra point.
John, you probably by your approach, John, the right thing to do at the end of the game was to kick the field goal rather than go for it on 4th and 5, when the math clearly said the Packers should have gone for it on 4th and 5 late in the fourth quarter. It gave you an additional 7% win probability by going for it on 4th down rather than giving Philadelphia the ball with too much of a lead and allowing them to kill the clock. The math says very clearly Matt LaFleur should have gone for it on 4th and 5, and that is going to give you the best probability of winning.
Unless it's the first game of the season where your team is sloppy and you have no control of the line of scrimmage.
Well, guess what? The not going for it that gave you the guaranteed 3 points fucked you over in the end.
So math is hard sometimes, and there's differing opinions, but
there are right opinions and wrong opinions, but
okay. Well, let's move then from probabilities of winning on the offensive side. How did our defense look? I think this was kind of a mixed bag.
Well, I mean, certainly we had those turnovers in the first quarter. In the first quarter, Philadelphia only had 5 rushing yards. We held Saquon Barkley to 3 yards on 3 rushing attempts in the first quarter. Jalen Hurts only had 30 yards passing and 3 interception. The Eagles only had 2 first downs in that entire first quarter. Clearly, the defense was working really well in the first quarter when they were able to create those turnovers. And the problem is that that ended up not being sustainable. And the Eagles really poured it on in the third and the fourth quarter against the Packers, 160 yards in that third quarter for the Eagles on offense. And they had 32 plays in that second quarter. And I think the number of plays is one of those things that had a major contribution going on later in the game.
Fatigue, right? I mean, it's the first game. There's not a lot of conditioning throughout, because it's the first game. And yeah, like I said before, it seemed like they just sort of got tired. And Barkley, boy, he's still good. I mean, if I'm a New York Giants fan sitting at home, I'm like, well, shit. How did we let this guy walk? Because wow. I mean, once he got going, he was unstoppable. I mean, he clearly carried the Eagles here.
And he's on pace for 51 touchdowns this season as well.
But he doesn't get to play the Packers defense every week. So I think that Eagles fans are going to be characteristically overly exuberant about this, and good for them. And it's going to be funny to watch them as their hopes drain throughout the season. But that second quarter was bad in not just Saquon Barkley, and Jalen Hurts had 124 yards passing. The Eagles actually beat us in time of possession in the second quarter, 12-15 to 245. We only had 8 plays in that second quarter, and not surprisingly, they beat us score-wise in that second quarter. Now, to be fair, one of the reasons why our second quarter was so fast is we had some pretty big hitters to Jaden Reed, and that's going to speed things up as far as your time, but we couldn't stop them. And in the end, in the second half, the biggest problem is we couldn't stop them on their sustained drives. And that wasn't just a problem in the second half. In the first quarter and in the second quarter, they had 11 plays, 70-yard drive. They had a 9-play, 70-yard drive, 15 plays, 57 yards to end the second quarter. And then going into the fourth quarter, 7 plays, 53 yards, and then that last killer drive, 16 plays for 67 yards. We could not get off the field. And it wasn't just that they were fatigued at the end. This is a problem throughout the game, and they were able to really exploit it at the end when those play counts were adding up.
Well, and in that 16-play drive at the end, I mean, it was almost half the fourth quarter, one, but two, there were 2 really untimely holding penalties as well. And that's, again, whether it's fatigue, whether it's sloppiness or whatever, those were just absolute killers. But you know what? The defense, though, I mean, the Eagles had a couple 3-and-outs as well. I think the defensive line played well when they were, unless they were trying to tackle Saquon Barkley. I think in the secondary, I think they did pretty well also. I mean, we saw our safeties step up, make a lot of plays. And it seemed like they were pretty frisky back there. They hit on A.J. Brown by Bullard. I mean, this is encouraging where they're going to say, okay, because again, the Eagles are a good team. I mean, this could be a rematch of a playoff game, in January. If the Eagles have got this figured out, if they don't choke down the stretch, again, they're one of the better teams in the NFC. So, I don't think the Packers can really hang their head. It's to see it slip away because of bad penalties and sloppiness. I think that's the point that's the most frustrating.
Sloppiness, I think, is the thing that I come back to. And we even look at the highlights of the defense, the 2 interceptions. First of all, the Xavier McKinney interception. Why was Quay Walker farther downfield than our safety on that play in coverage? Unless McKinney saw something and it was a bad throw, I feel like that something was wrong with the coverage there. And then Jair, I'm happy he got the pick. He took a lot of risks in this game. He looked like he got burned a few times. He got the pick, but please take a knee when you're in the end zone. He tried way too hard to make something happen. He only gets out to the 15-yard line. And on something like that, all you're doing, I mean, remember the Darren Sharper play that was like that, where Sharper ended up injured on a similar play? That's all you're doing. Once you start running, and people are all over the place, there's going to be a block, there's going to be exhaustion, there's going to be something that's going to lead to an injury. Fortunately, this play didn't have that, but please just take a knee. And even the sack that Keyshawn Nixon got, that's a broken play for the most part. With Hurts on the rollout and Nixon kind of in that no man's land, his coverage, he was free from his responsibility. And fortunately, had a great burst of speed that he was able to get Jalen Hurts. That's not a designed cornerback blitz or a design where the cornerback is going to get the sack. That's just how the play ended up. But it ended up that way because Hurts had so much time holding onto the football, trying to make something happen with a pass downfield.
I had alluded to it in our last podcast, and I was hoping that if the Packers put a lot of pressure on Hurts, that they would have success. Well, that sort of blew up. Neil?
Yeah, I mean, we only had the 2 sacks, and Rashawn Gary had that one great drive that ended up being a 3-and-out for the Eagles in the third quarter. But there was a lot of lack of pressure. And, Matt LaFleur talked about this as well, that we thought that we were going to be able to get pressure with our guys, and just the Eagles players were too good. And I think that is one of the things that points to the coaching staff, is that when it was not working, they needed to be trying something different. They needed to have multiple ways in order to solve the problem, to make those halftime adjustments that are necessary in order to make the plays that are going to win you the game. And to be fair, we did a reasonable job containing Hurts most of the time. He only had 33 yards on 13 rushes. So most of the time we did okay. But yeah, there were some critical rushes down the stretch. And going back into that fourth quarter, there were just some key passes to Devontae Smith that just absolutely killed us, on top of those penalties that destroyed us. And I mean, this is the thing that's frustrating. If you look at the Eagles' numbers in the third quarter and the fourth quarter, there's nothing spectacular about their numbers. They were actually 0-5 on third downs. Now, that doesn't include the 2 that they got because of penalties, but they were 0-5 on third downs, but they still had 12 first downs, because while they were converting on first and second down, obviously. But the Eagles only had 83 yards of total offense in that fourth quarter. It seems like they were more dominant than that at the time. Yeah. And it was just because it was a grind. And yes, when you have a 16-play drive, your number of yards per play by definition can't be that high.
We were concerned about 2 things, backup quarterback and our kicker. And unfortunately, both of them kind of came back and bit us in the ass in this game, or at least because of this game. So Narveson, he made his first couple kicks. He made some extra points, but yet he missed that, a pretty makeable field goal. Now, he hit the upright, we had the doink, but this is something that really should be almost automatic, right? From that range for an NFL kicker. So where do we go from here?
I mean, the good news is he didn't miss any extra points, and he was 3 for 4. And I guess my one positive of the asshats is that our first points of the year came from the asshats, at least. So there's something going for us.
For me, Braden Arvison passes the eye test, because especially those very first 2 kicks, he gets the 6 points for us in the first quarter. Both of those kicks are crisp. They're solid. They've got height and velocity on them, and they're tight. And it's just one of those things where when you see like his demeanor getting ready to kick, he's focused, and he's got good speed, good rhythm, and the ball flies real nicely. And I didn't realize it, I think, until watching him make those kicks and realizing that Anders Carlson it almost seemed like he had this like shroud of sadness over him whenever he would go out to kick. He just didn't seem like he was there. You know what I mean?
Or it was like too big for him, maybe, or just he couldn't focus.
Like he just was like walking through, and like his kicks, while they had good distance on them, they didn't seem to have that pop. The way the ball spins in the air, the velocity that it has going through the air, or the trajectory. Those first 2 kicks from Narveson split beautifully. The one that he misses is still tight. It's a solid kick. It just hits the upright.
A solid doink.
Yeah. But it's still a nice, the form was great. Everything about it was good except for the aim. So it's just one of those things where in those four field goals that I just said, wow, there's just some confidence in this kid that he has on the field getting ready to make these kicks. He has confidence through the kick. And when that ball is in the air, you have confidence watching that kick.
I think it's just more is going to be as much a liability as Carlson, because I don't know what other options we have right now. And we just have to hope that his confidence improves as he gets more experience. I mean, that was his first time trying a fourth quarter NFL field goal. You looked at the first 3, you said everything looked good. You looked at the extra points, they all look good. It was his first chance at a fourth quarter NFL field goal coming from a non-major college program. It's not like he was playing in the national championship with Georgia or Alabama. So I think there is going to be an adjustment. But yeah, John, I agree with you. The eye test really does pass as far as Narveson is concerned. Now, as far as special teams are concerned, I do have some concerns about other things that we did in special teams. And it relates to this fundamental question of fatigue that we saw in those players in the game. I'm just going to start out with Tucker Kraft, right? So he played 64 of 67 offensive snaps and also played 16 special team snaps. The real fatigue, however, was on the defense, where we had Bullard with 76 snaps. Bullard also had 15 special team snaps for 91 total plays that he was on the field. That is going to contribute to your fatigue. And he was not the only defensive player who played a lot on special teams as well. McKinney, 76 snaps on defense, plus 13 on special teams, 89. Both Quay Walker and Jair played 76 snaps plus 6 on special teams. That pushes them over 80. And Isaiah McDuffie had 9 special team snaps plus 74. We had 5 players that were over 80 snaps. In contrast, if you look at all of the players on the Eagles who had over 72 snaps, they add up collectively to only 10 total special teams snaps among the 5 people that played the most on their defense. The Eagles' top defenders, the Eagles defenders who were playing the most, were not getting themselves tired on special teams as well.
Didn't realize that. And I wonder if that's going to be something that we're going to have to watch as the season progresses. Was this sort of an experiment, or is this like the way it's going to be?
I mean, the problem is we talked about this last year, and they did things like this last year. And, we talked about the rotation on the defensive line as being one of our strengths. Well, Lucas Van Ness only played 19 snaps total. And that doesn't seem like the type of rotation you want. We talked about all of the D-back plays that were made. Carrington Valentine only had 9 snaps on defense. So we weren't rotating anywhere near as much as our strength would seem to be. And most importantly, given how the team was not yet at full conditioning, how we really needed to play. We did not adjust to the conditions of needing to rotate people appropriately to make sure that we were fresh at the end in the fourth quarter.
So that's coaching. Yeah, that's an astute observation, but it's also maybe a little disconcerting too, right? Why wouldn't they be rotating these players in?
Well, conditioning is probably a factor in it. And when we talk about, kind of prep again, going back to preseason, how much do these starters, how much work are they getting? And again, if you're treating the season opener as a 4th preseason game, now let's take a look at coming up this Sunday in Green Bay. It's going to be unseasonably warm. We're looking at potentially 80-degree temperatures. They're now maybe coming off of that a little bit, but it's going to be a warm day in Green Bay. And it wasn't a warm night in Sao Paulo. It was a bit cooler night, and your body reacts differently. So now coming into this Sunday, I think that you're going to have to see more rotation of players just simply from that midday rise in temperature, the way the heat hangs out in that bowl, especially down on the field. I think, Jeff, we will see a lot more rotation of players in this game.
In the end, I'm actually most bothered by the lack of rotation with this, between the starters and the special teams on defense. The 5 players who had the most plays on defense, every single one of them had a lot of special teams plays. And we've got to not be doing that if we want our defenders to be fresh. And these are D-backs. This is where, yes, you're going to get burned if you take a play off. You're going to get burned. And an explosive offense that is capable of having those explosive plays and taking advantage of a defender who's not quite at full speed on a play, that's something that's a problem. And, oh, by the way, I watched the Texans-Colts game, and the Colts offense has issues. There were definitely problems with them moving the ball consistently. But the one thing that they do have with Anthony Richardson, he was only 9 of 19, but that 9 receptions led to 212 yards because he had 3 passes over 50 yards, including some big touchdown passes. The big play, and this was something that was just dramatic during the game. It's like they're doing nothing, they're doing nothing, they're doing nothing. 50, 60-yard pass. And we've got to be aware that that can happen at any time with either Alex Pierce, who had 3 receptions for 125, or with Ashton Dulin, who had a 54-yard touchdown reception on his 1 reception. We got to be ready for that.
And those are not household names, those receivers. Like who?
The other thing that we should be looking at, though, as far as the possibilities for the Packers, the Colts did actually lose to the Texans. Stroud had a Stroud-like game, 234 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. But what the Texans really were able to do is to pound the ball with Joe Mixon, who had 159 rushing yards on 30 rushes. And that seems to be the Packers' way to win this game against the Colts is to run the ball early and often. The Texans demonstrated that you can win against the Colts by running a lot and then sprinkling in some passes. I think that's what we've got to do in order to give ourselves the best chance of winning this game.
So basically, our backup quarterback, is going to be a game manager. Is that what you're saying, Neil?
I would be perfectly happy to have Trent Dilfer as our quarterback on Sunday. Yes.
I think the nice thing that too is Malik Willis is considered a mobile quarterback as well. So if we have to win this game on the ground, so be it. I'm sure that the Cincinnati Bengals fans are wondering why Joe Mixon did so well for Houston and why he couldn't have stuck around. But if the lesson is there to keep the ball on the ground, I think Josh Jacobs is ready to do that. And with a mobile quarterback, I think they can game plan for a good ground game.
The other thing that we have going for us is that the complement to them having a lot of long ball plays is that the Colts had real problems sustaining drives. They only had 14 first downs in that game. They only had 20 minutes in the time of possession, and they only had 303 total yards. It was either a boom or bust situation. We've got to prevent the booms. If we're able to keep them in that same mode of having problem sustaining drives, we should be in a good situation.
Or if we can get some turnovers, that would be the other thing, right? If Richardson throws up, if it's a long ball or whatever, we can get some either interceptions or things like that. Again, it can't be as sloppy. It has to be a cleaner game, far fewer penalties, and I like our chances.
From the defensive perspective, though, the defense, I think, needs to start everything up front. Like you said, we didn't see as much rotation in that front four as we probably expected. Yeah, we got a couple of interceptions, which was nice, but there's a lot of times where the defense is out of position. Quay Walker, I think a lot of times is out of position in this last game. So, from Jeff Hafley's defense, were we inciting the holy name of Joe Barry at any point? Put $1 in the jar? No, but there also wasn't a lot of flash, right? I mean, we were promised a lot of, this is going to be a fast defense. This is going to be a hard-hitting defense. Javon Buller's biggest hit is knocking down a receiver who was coming out to block at about the same time that the running back is getting tackled. So I want to see the hits. I want to see the push. I want to see control on the line of scrimmage. I don't want to see linebackers out of position and chasing. The Blake Martinez leading the team in tackles 8 yards down the field. This defense will come together, presuming that Jeff Hafley has a game plan that is going to continue to build on a scheme.
The good news about the Colts is that they have a pretty inexperienced quarterback. I was hoping that if the Packers could get to Hurts, that they could rattle him, where instead that he really picked them apart when they blitzed and tried to get pressure on him. Well, I think we go for it again, and hopefully the result's different, simply because it isn't much inexperienced quarterback. Let's get him happy feet back there. Let's get him throwing up some terrible balls. I want to see a pick six. I want to see some, 4 or 5 turnovers. I mean, come on. This defense needs it. They need some confidence, and they need to really assert control. And so the offense essentially can coast. And you know what? Maybe we win with less than 150 yards of offense.
It's a little bit of greed on the defense, but I like where you're going there, and I'm hoping it's a lot more than 150 yards of offense. We're going to need to move the ball a little bit, but I agree with you, Jeff. This is clearly got to be our game plan, is winning with defense and winning on the ground.
It is the home opener for the Green Bay Packers in the regular season. The Indianapolis Colts coming to town Sunday at noon, and that means tailgating. Back in Lot 1, we had a good time in the preseason, Jeff. It was the preseason for everybody. But the good news is, Neil, we never lose a tailgate party, and it's going to be a whopper again this Sunday. Parking lot opens up at 8 a.m. The party starts at 8:01 a.m. You don't have to be there at the beginning, but just come on by, stop on by Lot 1 and hit the Shotsky. We'll have some of Grandma Lambo's apple pie, and there will be plenty of tailgating around the stadium. Our friend Kate, who's been on the show, she will be there in her spot right next to Nitschke Field. They're getting their tailgate ready to go. They're going to play some flip cup. So if you think you're good at flip cup, go ahead and challenge Kate because she is pretty good at it. Neil, you even have a plan for Sunday morning, but it involves the other football.
Yeah, it's the North London Derby between Arsenal and Tottenham Hotspur, and I will be at the Green Bay Distillery from 8 until 10 because that is always one of the biggest matches of the season against our biggest rival. Join the friends from Green Bay Armory and then head out to all of the tailgates afterward.
And refresh my memory, what do you guys think of Tottenham?
Shit!
All right, good. I will also try to make a point to get in there at least a little bit, probably in the first half of that match, just to say hi to everybody, because those guys are great that support the Arsenal and support the Packers. It's nice to have that all in one spot, and you can catch both games during the day. So Neil, we'll see you closer to kickoff after that 10 a.m. when your match ends. But again, looking at a good day in Green Bay. If you're heading to Green Bay, drive carefully. If you're getting there Saturday night, great. Have a nice day in Green Bay on Saturday. Go to the pro shop, walk around the stadium, get all the pictures that you need to do, because it's a shit show when Sunday rolls around. The pictures are a lot different on Sunday than they are on Saturday. If you're coming up Sunday morning, please drive carefully. There's a lot of road construction on Highway 41, and it just seems to affect the way people drive in the morning. But get there early. First game of the season. If you're looking to park in the neighborhoods, you might be parking a little bit further away than you normally would expect to, unless you get there super early, but it should be a good day all the way around. And please stop by the Lot 1 tailgate party, say hi to the GBC podcast, and enjoy a shot ski. And if you're wondering, what does that mean, the Lot 1 tailgate party? We are in Lot 1. There are parking lots around Lambeau Field. They are numbered, and we are in the one that is numbered 1. We are in the corner closest to the big steps at the Oneida Gate. You cannot miss the big steps going into the stadium. It's kind of that main thoroughfare coming up from the Bart Starr Plaza next to the Resch Center and the Don Hudson Center. As you're coming up, you'll see the white pickup truck. You'll see the shot ski. Hopefully you'll hear the music, because I like to turn it up as the day goes on. And we will be blasting nothing but bangers to get us ready for kickoff noon Sunday. Who's coming to town, Jeff, though? It's the Indianapolis Colts. And I bet there's a little bit of history between these two teams.
Indeed. Baltimore Colts' first season was in 1953. They moved from Baltimore, as we well know. But one thing I thought was a little interesting is these are two franchises that they don't play each other very often. Wouldn't normally seem that connected. But over the course of their histories, a total of 67 players have played for both teams. And interestingly enough, there's some names that you're going to recognize here. Linebacker Tony Bennett, the infamous Najee Davenport, Ted Hendricks. Yes, that guy who's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. You've got the infamous and perhaps the worst draft pick in Packers history, one Tony Mandrich.
He followed Lindy Infante over to Indianapolis, yes.
He did, yep. Fuzzy Thurston played for the Indianapolis Colts. And interestingly enough, it was before he played in Green Bay, not after.
Fuzzy was drafted by the Eagles, ended up going to Baltimore, played that first season for the Colts, and then came to Green Bay.
Yeah, it turned out pretty well for him in Green Bay, fortunately. Right. And then sort of the opposite, Jeff Saturday, who played many, many years for the Colts. And then, he played for the Packers for 1 year as well. And Andre Rison, Vince Workman, Blaze Winter. But was interesting, so there's a total of 6 quarterbacks who played at least one snap for both teams. Matt Hasselbeck, remember Blair Keel from the 80s? We had the Magic Man himself, Don Majkowski, Lamar McCann, Scott Tolzien, and Bill Troop. Kind of an interesting mix there. And not to be outdone, there were 4 Packer Hall of Famers that played on both teams. The aforementioned Fuzzy Thurston, the Magic Man Don Majkowski. Then we had Ezra Johnson. Remember him? He's in the Packer Hall of Fame. And then going way back to the 60s, Ron Koselnik. Lots of players have played for both teams.
But kind of amazing for these two teams, given how strong both teams were in the 1960s, they have played in the playoffs only one time in the 1965 playoffs when the Packers beat the Colts 13-10. And Johnny Unitas did not play in that game, and Bart Starr did not start that game.
Thank you for your history nugget as well.
And I think probably of all of those, my favorite is Andre Rison. Andre Rison is one of those guys, Jeff, you'll be happy to know, carried my fantasy football team in the early days of fantasy football back in the early 90s.
Nice. Way to get that in there, John.
Boy, were we happy when Andre Rison came to Green Bay for that Super Bowl 31 season.
Not a player, but a coach. Lindy Infante was also coached the Packers, and he also coached the Colts as well.
Yeah, we kind of mentioned that, with both Majkowski and Mandrich following him over there after that beautiful 1989 season. So looking forward to a great game. Looking forward to a great game between the Packers and the Colts this Sunday in Green Bay. With that, any final thoughts on week 2?
Although Jordan Love's injury was most unexpected, my hope is that youth is served. Hoping he has, because he's young, I'm hoping that he has a very quick recovery. The healing process goes quickly. We're not without him for too many weeks. It'll be very interesting to see the defense can get rolling, the running game, again, just a game manager, and hopefully we'll see a win for, I'm sure, what will be just an exciting, pumped up crowd, beautiful day. Packer football, go Pack, go.
The game was a disappointment, but the biggest disappointment of that game was the performance of the head coach, Matt LaFleur. And fundamentally, having a team that was not prepared for that game is what cost us a victory in week 1. It can be from our inability to capitalize on those turnovers at the beginning, the failures as far as time management, having 3 timeouts called early in the first half, to a situation where Keyshawn Nixon actually thinks that it's reasonable to return that kick and lose 16 yards of field position and 5 seconds. But as much as anything, it is because of Matt LaFleur that Jordan Love was playing at the end of that game. We are crisper earlier in that game. We play our starters in the preseason. We're a little bit sharper. We win that game. Jordan Love doesn't get injured. Fundamentally, the whole reason why coaches don't play players in the preseason is because they're afraid of injury. Well, guess what? That lack of preparedness is why Jordan Love got injured in the closing minutes of the game. We need to have a better approach to the start of the season in future years. We need Matt LaFleur to be sharper than he was in this preseason and in week 1. Go Pack, go.
And let's just hope that the injury is not as severe and the comeback is sooner rather than later. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit subscribe, leave a comment. You can find the GBC podcast at Green Bay Chat. That's all one word. On Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And we're on Facebook at the GBC podcast Green Bay Chat. And may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Right.